Families have to understand that I used substance as a solution to my problem. It was not the problem, it was the solution to the problem. Let's say we have a son that's trying to get sober, and we think when the substance is removed, then we're good, right? They just need to be sober. The truth is when we enter into recovery, many of us stop using substance and our life gets actually worse for a bit. And so if we simply just remove the coping skill and don't add new things, that's why relapse is so high, because we will go back to the only coping skill that we had. I could hear my family playing in the living room. They were playing games or whatever, the three of them. And I said out loud, as though there were another 15 people sitting in that room with me, where the hell has this been my whole life? That moment, I share this with other addicts. It's like it was the first time that I felt like I could breathe. It was the first time that I felt like I could fit in my skin. It was the first time that I didn't care that I had been sexually abused or that my dad was an alcoholic or I had just, almost died and had to say goodbye to my family. That was the moment that I realized that I'd found my solution.
Welcome to the Brainwaves podcast by Opus, where we sit down with industry leaders and unpack their journeys, explore key challenges, and talk about how they're shaping the future of behavioral health and healthcare technology. I'm your host, Humberto Bunioto, and today we're speaking with Jennifer Chase. She's a life coach and the founder of Rides Addiction Life Coaching. Jennifer's perspective spans daughter, person in recovery, and mom, and that lived experience is the foundation of her work with families. We'll talk about what healthy support really looks like, how to set boundaries without abandoning your loved ones, and how families can break generational patterns and start to heal together. Jennifer, thanks for being here today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, maybe we can start off by you telling us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so you hit all points, right? I am a daughter of an alcoholic, and in my family, I've been able to look down at least 4 generations down both sides, my mom's side and my dad's side, and there's addiction in all of it. So mostly alcoholism, but I had sort of a grandma and an aunt that were opiate addicts before that was kind of a thing to be. And unfortunately, I'm part of a statistic that says that 1 out of every 4 girl that's raised like that and 1 out of every 6 boy that's raised like that is grown up with some sexual abuse. And I was sexually abused by my mom's dad. So my childhood was a series of opportunities that I looked in the mirror and said that I'm the problem, right? There was a common denominator to so many different things, and it felt like I was the common denominator to all of it. My dad, who was my guy, right? He was my person. He was the one person on this earth that I knew loved me, and we were a lot alike. But his alcoholism created this inconsistency, right? Like I didn't know if he was going to come home and be drunk or if he was going to be my guy. And I felt woefully underprotected by my mom for a large part of my life. And so, again, the common denominator to all of these situations was me. And so, as I entered adulthood, the only thing that was important to me was that I broke the chains, that I didn't carry on sort of this generational thing that had been going on in my family. And so I was hyper aware that I had the biology of potentially being an addict. And I did not want that for me. Like I looked at my parents' inability to break the chains of this thing as just pure weakness, right? Like I think I thought that they could if they wanted to, but they chose not to. And then January 2003, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor and I had to go into emergency brain surgery. And when they took the tumor out, they caused pretty extensive nerve damage in my head, which led me on my path to chronic pain, which introduced me to opiates. And so
Which most people don't realize is the leading cause of addiction. Like people think it's just, I was hyper uninformed about the industry when I first started in it 12 years ago, but go on. It's.
Yeah. Well, and for me, I had been, I don't know if fixated is the right word, but so aware of alcoholism, right? And so aware of not using alcohol to excess and all of the things. But when I was prescribed opiates, and I used for about 14 years, I was prescribed everything I ever took, right? Like I was clearly overprescribed in a time in the early 2000s here in America that, there was some complacency, and I just thought they must know what they're doing, right? I'm not
Yeah,
the
of course.
professional in the room. They say it's fine.
We
I
always
guess it's
think that,
fine,
right? We always think of the
right?
professionals as they
Yeah.
must know what they're doing. I'm going to
Yeah.
leave it up to them.
Yeah. And I tell a story, like, I remember I was about 2 weeks out of surgery, so I had been home for about a week, and I could hear my family playing in the living room. They were playing games or whatever, the 3 of them, and I said out loud as though there were another 15 people sitting in that room with me, "Where the hell has this been my whole life?" Like, that moment, I share this with other addicts, it's like it was the first time that I felt like I could breathe. It was the first time that I felt like I could fit in my skin. It was the first time that I didn't care that I had been sexually abused or that my dad was an alcoholic or I had just, almost died and had to say goodbye to my family. And that was the moment that I realized that I'd found my solution, right? I had found the solution to all of the hard things that I had walked through in my life. And that was my path, right? That was when it all started for me. And when I got sick, my kids were 2 and 5. And when I got sober, my
In
kids were eight.
2003.
Yeah. And when I got sober, my kids were 18 and 21. So I very much continued the generational trauma, if you will, for generations. And I became the mom that I swore I was never going to be. I swore that I was going to protect my children, that they were never going to experience anything that I experienced as a child. And then as my behavior and addiction proceeded, my kids experienced every single bit of that. And unfortunately, my son's senior year of high school, I found out that he was also addicted to opiates. And not only was he addicted to opiates, but he was addicted to my opiates.
Mhm.
And so, I wish I could tell you and your audience and the people that are listening that was the day, right? That was the day that I said, we're not doing this anymore.
Mhm.
I love my child too much, but unfortunately it wasn't. It was the beginning of that process, right? It was the beginning of the end, but I used for another 6 or 9 months, even while I knew my son was struggling. And so that's the journey, right? For me, I was a child, I became the addict myself, and now I'm a mama of an addict in recovery. But what I've learned from all of that is that this is very much a family disease. And my naivety, if you will, that my parents just didn't want it, right? They didn't have the courage to break the chains of this thing. I understand now is a much deeper family system that creates this generational trauma.
So I know you said like when you found out your son had an addiction issue, that was like the moment. That was not the moment, obviously. And
Right.
then 9 months, 6 to 9 months
Yeah.
later, you went out and got treatment. When did you know that this was going to be the thing that what were you doing before in the first, like between 2003, or what were you doing professionally before you embarked in this career as a coach?
So I, for a while, stayed home with my kids. So when I actually had my brain tumor, I was a stay-at-home mom. And then I went to work at their elementary school and was teaching at their elementary school. So I had the same days and on and days off as they did. And then in I think 2010, went on permanent disability because of my medical condition. So after so at that point, yes, I have chronic pain, right? And I had a brain tumor and all of that is true, but it just created it festered my disease of addiction, right? When I was on a permanent disability. I got sober and I was sober for about 18 months, and I actually went and worked in the treatment field for about 6 years
Really?
before I started my own business and started helping families. I worked in the outpatient arena for and helped build a company that that's actually where I went to outpatient. It's a company
Okay.
that I believe very, very deeply in. Was there for about 6 years and then decided to kind of figure out how I could help family. It feels so right from
Mhm.
all of my different perspectives to be able to help family members, especially those that don't understand necessarily what it can be like to be in this addicted brain, help untangle this thing and help family members understand that there is some accountability for the mom and the dad, not just the addict, right? The addict is just not the problem. And oftentimes those people that don't understand what it's like to be in an addicted brain, they don't understand how we unwind this thing and we all find peace in the end.
Yeah. My mother-in-law is in recovery from an eating disorder, and she also went to Workaholics Anonymous because she was an workaholic her whole life. In the beginning of her treatment, probably 5 years ago, I was a little bit annoyed at how much she was talking about it around us.
Yeah.
And I thought, maybe she's really proud of going through. And of course, we were supporting her. But now I understand the importance. And I'm sure that's kind of core to what you do. The importance of the whole, it being, I think you mentioned something, like you said something before about addiction is like a family problem, is not a
Yeah.
person problem. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously from your dad, and my dad died from an alcoholism
Mine too.
issue when
Mine
I was
too. Yeah.
6.
I'm sorry.
And I 1,000% agree. And I think we are still feeling, I mean, this is 38 years ago, and we're still feel the, side effects of that. And just this week, I was having a conversation with my mom, and we were talking about, like, I wish I did more. And this is a person who raised a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old on her own without a dad around, and still blames herself for not having done a better job. And none of us have had any addiction issues or anything like that, which, to your point earlier, 1 out of 4. So we're somehow fell off the statistics. Tell me a little more about the influence of the family in a successful path to recovery by an addict.
So this is what I'm so passionate about, because families have to understand that I used substance as a solution to my problem. It was not the problem, it was the solution to the problem. So oftentimes we have, let's say we have a son that's trying to get sober, and we think when the substance is removed, then we're good, right? They just need to be sober. The truth is, when we enter into recovery, many of us stop using substance and our life gets actually worse for a bit, because now we don't have a coping skill. We only had one coping skill, right? When life was good, we got high. When it was bad, we got high. When it was all the things, we had one coping skill. And so if we simply just remove the coping skill and don't add new things, that's why relapse is so high, right? Because we will go back to the only coping skill that we had. But when we first get sober, learning all of those new coping skills and dealing with the shame and the resentments that we've caused and the lack of trust in our lives is very, very, very difficult. And so it's important for a family member to know, like, substance is not the problem. Substance is the solution to the problem. What's hard to hear sometimes from a family's perspective is sometimes the problem is actually the family dynamic,
Mm,
right? I talk about this, I refer to it as a dance floor. So if you can think about your family like waltzing, let's just say that's what your family does, right? So if my family waltzed, I didn't like waltzing. I was the
mhm.
only one on the dance floor that was like, this dance does not work for me. And so when I got sober and I got off the dance floor, if you will, I was like, I actually like to tango. That's the dance that feels more natural for me. So if you can think about me getting back on this dance floor, everyone is waltzing and I'm tangoing. And the message is, we want you to be sober, but we want you to waltz, because that's what everybody does, right? And the truth is, I cannot. Like, I have one of two choices. I can either be high on your dance floor, or I got to get off altogether. And the idea that I'm trying to help families understand is, we all have to learn a new dance floor or a new dance that works for all of us, where our loved one can be sober on this dance floor. And
And it
it
may
ta-
not be waltz or tango. It might be something else that none of us like, but it's a compromise.
it has to be something else almost, right? It has to be a combination of all of us relearning how we do this, because oftentimes on that waltzing dance floor, we are all trying to be this ideal version of ourselves. right? I'm trying to be who my mom thinks I'm supposed to be. My mom's trying to be who society thinks. Like we're all trying to be this ideal version of ourselves. And this dance floor that we have to create is a dance that we can be authentic. As a recovering addict, I have to. It's not even a I want to. It's a I have to find spaces where I can be authentically me. And that's the only thing that combats that shame and that critic that's inside of me that ultimately leads me to choose substance.
Makes sense. What are some I guess effective what does effective support looks like from family members? And are there things that people commonly do out of love that might actually make things worse?
So many
I think
things,
the answer is yes,
actually.
but what are they?
Yeah, 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 so the first sorry, tell me what the first part of that question was?
Yeah. So what does effective support look like if I'm a family member? So
Yeah.
say my wife has an addiction issue, what should I be doing?
Yep, great question, and I'm gonna start with that one, and then I'll hit the second one, but what we can be doing is working on our own fears. Right? So if I'm a mama and I'm watching my son, so my son used for another 3 years after I got sober, right? So that 3 years was incredibly difficult. And what I need to do during that time is work on me and my own fears. Because to speak to the second part of that question is what we do that's not helpful is we try to control outcomes based on what my fears are because I am not willing to sit in the discomfort of my own fear, right? Most of us that are addicts are incredibly stubborn people. And most of us, if you talk to us, they will say almost always that I learned things the hard way. I
Mm.
just do, right? I've got to muddle my way through. I've got to make the mistakes. But oftentimes we have family members that are trying to avoid that because me muddling through and doing things the hard way is incredibly painful for them. And so they're trying to eliminate the hard in my life, but that's the only way that I learn. And it's the only way I'm going to find my way out of this. So it is important for family members to allow the muddling, right? Allow the discomfort. Um, we get sober when the benefits no longer, or the consequences are outweighing the benefits. And for many of us, for a long time, the benefits, there are a lot of benefits to being addicted to substance. And that sort of peace that I spoke to earlier, and the fact that I could finally breathe and I wasn't always worried and full of shame all the time, like those are a lot of benefits. And so it takes a lot of discomfort to switch that and make the consequences of this thing more powerful than the benefits. And family has to let that happen. It's not tough love in the sense that I'm adding more. Like I'm not adding anything. I'm not making it harder for them. I'm just allowing them the full weight of their own life without removing any of the hard. And then I need to learn the lessons of why is this so hard for me to be in so much pain, right? And the discomfort of it and make that a me problem rather than a them problem.
You mentioned tough love just now. And so when you're coaching a loved one to set healthy boundaries, how do you do that without just resorting to tough love?
Yeah.
What is the process? So I
Yes.
contact you and I'm like, Jennifer, I need help.
Yep.
What do you do?
So boundaries are obviously one of the most important parts of trying to find our way out of this. And I think the thing that's important about boundaries is boundaries are not punishment. I'm going to say that again. Boundaries are not punishment. Boundaries are protecting my own peace. So if I am setting boundaries to punish, which is often sometimes what tough love can be if we're not careful, then I'm setting an incorrect boundary. Like I'm not being helpful. I'm contributing to part of the problem, right? Boundaries are protecting my own peace. So one of the first things that I do when I have a new client is look, maybe let's just guess I have a client with a 45-year-old child who they're paying for a hotel room for the last 6 months because they're homeless and they don't want them to be on the streets. Okay. Oftentimes step 1 is not stopping paying for the hotel room. I'm not even close to being able to set that boundary, right? So we start very, very small. Let me give you an example. I have a client whose child lives at their house, again, 40 something. Their grandkids live at their house, and she's having a really hard time setting boundaries because she's very fearful of him leaving and taking the grandkids, right? So we start small. And where we landed, this sounds really silly, but just bear with me. We landed on she's not doing his laundry if his socks are not pulled out, right?
Sounds like a good start because that's the type of stuff that would grind my gears too.
Right.
So that
And
would
and
be a good boundary for me.
she's getting resentful, she's getting angry, and yet it's a boundary that she can hold to 100% of the time. That's the important part with a boundary, is if I set it, I have to hold to it 100% of the time. I don't like rigid thinking or black and white thinking, but boundaries are black and white, especially when you're talking about an addict. So if I say curfew is at 12, then curfew is at 12, and 12:01 is not 12, because my brain as an addict says, so 12:01, I'm going to push this next time to 12:04. Then we're going to be at 12:15. And before you know it, you're up at 2 o'clock and they're still not home. Right. So it's really important that if you're going to set a boundary, you stick to it 100%. So maybe socks is where you can start. And then that will give you enough confidence, right, to hold to this boundary and get confidence that you can set it, that we start adding to, okay, what's next? What's the next one that you feel comfortable holding to? And you will start regaining your peace with every boundary that you set. With an addict, you set a boundary and they're doing really well, and you kind of let your foot off the gas a little bit and they blow through the boundary. It just tells you that you got to raise it a little bit, right? You got to raise the fence a little
Mm,
bit. And when you have enough courage to do this time and over again, you will get to the point where they will soon respect your boundaries and they will know that there's no whiffle, we're not wobbling back on this. I'm going to hold to it, because most of the time I've set a precedence up until this point that I don't hold to boundaries, right? I say, I'm going to kick you out and I don't, or I'm going to, you're going to lose your car and you
threats, right?
don't, or right. So I have to then show the person that I'm serious this time, right? And I'm going to do that by holding to the boundary every single time. So the answer to your question that I think is really important is boundaries are not punishment. And if I ask myself the question, am I trying to punish them with this boundary? Then I got to refocus and relook at it.
Mm, makes sense. Going back to when you found out that your son had an addiction issue, that's when you discovered that you were sort of unintentionally enabling him, right?
I was his drug addict, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that realization impact you as a mom and someone in recovery? Like, was that, I mean, you mentioned that it took you like 6 to 9 months
Yeah. Yeah.
to actually, I'll just say, do something about it just to
Yeah.
keep it simple, but I'm
Yeah.
sure you were thinking about it. But that, I guess, that just speaks to the strength of addiction. If your own son has an issue and you're still like, I can't get out of it, like, I still need to be doing this thing while I know that I'm enabling him, that's like a really strong drive. And I guess that speaks volumes to, how strong it is. But I guess my question was, how did that realization impact you as a mom and somebody in recovery? Like,
Yeah. So first I want to say about what you're talking about the strength of sort of that addiction. I tell people this. I speak in pictures. I think in pictures. I love my children, right? Like I love my children. And I would have stepped on their head in a lake and drowned them in order to get to drugs. And not because I'm a horrible human being or that I'm don't love my children, right? But that's the power of addiction, because it is multifaceted in the sense that there's a chemical component, right? There's a dopamine component, and then there's this emotional component, um, that that a lot of people that don't have that understanding, and I think we can think about it in terms of, like, we split hairs as a society. Like, we can talk about it from a sugar addiction. You were talking about your mother-in-law who has an overworking. Like, we all, when we do anything compulsively, we are trying to solve a problem, right? It's not the problem, it's the solution to the problem. And so I think anybody, even if you don't have a substance problem, can understand sort of that, come hell or high water, I'm going to get substance. And if I have to step on my kids to get it, that's just the reality. I'm not proud of that by any means, but that's definitely where I was in the middle of my addiction. But to answer your question, I don't necessarily have the great words to describe what it felt like to know that. I mean, we can soften it, but the truth is I had become inadvertently my son's drug dealer, right? And the shame around that, I already had such shame to begin with, but the shame around impacting my son in that way was unbearable. And I tried for probably 4 months after that in different various ways to end my life because I didn't know how to carry on. I didn't know how to come back from that. And when I went into treatment, so my son graduated from high school on a Friday, nope, Saturday, and I checked myself into a facility the very next day. I went into that facility with the idea that I was gonna learn how to use like a gentle lady, right? I was gonna lower my tolerance. I was gonna get better because there wasn't so many drugs in the house at hiding them and keeping them from him. I was just gonna it's gonna be a better drug addict.
Mm,
And
that's interesting.
in the name of saving my son. I loved him, but I didn't see giving up my only solution. And what happened in
So
that
when you
facility.
checked into the facility on that Sunday after his graduation, you went in thinking,
Yes.
I'm going to outsmart the system
Yes.
and come out
Yes.
figuring out a way to continue without
Yes.
affecting him.
Yes. Yes.
That's so interesting that your brain is like
Yes.
the mental gymnastics around it is
Yes.
very interesting, right?
Yeah. So I'm gonna save him, but I'm also not giving up my only solution, right? My only coping mechanism that I have in life. And that was the only goal that I had. And I spent 28 days in that facility and everything changed for me. I learned that, first of all, it was the first time I had said out loud since, well, I told my husband, but other than that, I had really not told many people about my sexual abuse outside of my family. And there was not a lot of, like, in order for somebody to believe me, they would have had to understand their part in all of it, right? And so they weren't really interested in hearing that. And so it wasn't something that I had really dealt with much in my life other than it had just impacted me so greatly. It was the first time that I started saying it out loud. It was the first time that there were people in that facility that were like, I also experienced trauma. Right. And I started connecting with these people. You hear sometimes the opposite of addiction is connection. And for me, that was 100% true. I started connecting with people that understood my level of shame and had it themselves. And when I would look at them and I was like, you're a good human. Like, I think you're an amazing human. And they would say, yeah, I think you are too. But we both hated ourselves, right? So incredibly. But the connection started to change my world. And I spent 28 days in that facility. And I left that facility understanding that the only way I was going to save my son was to save myself. And so as a mama, I realized the greatest form of love that I could provide for my son was to heal and to model for him what healing would look like when he was ready. And to learn the boundaries, I needed to learn how to stop contributing to the problem and started contributing to the solution, which was really hard because I had to face my fears and I had to face my shame. But what was best for him was for me to recover. And for him, when he was ready to say, Mama, I need some help. And I know you know how to help me because I'm watching you do it. But still, there are days I would be lying if I said there are not some days where I wake up and just am devastated that that was his path and that I led him on that path and that this will be a struggle for him for the rest of his days. And he's only 27 years old, right? For the rest of his days, he will fight this just like I will. And that is devastating some days. It's suffocating some days. But I know that the only way that I can help and contribute to the solution is to be well myself and to not enable him and not rescue him and allow him to muddle through life and not try to help, fix it for him and control outcomes that make me feel better. And he's thriving right now, which is the greatest gift of all of it.
How has been your relationship with him since when did it go to treatment, and how long has it been in recovery?
Yeah, so he went to treatment in September of 2020, in the middle, smack dab in the middle of COVID.
That must have been weird too, right?
It was
In
so
addition
weird.
to, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I tell the story, we're walking him up to the door and we can't go in, right? It's in the middle of COVID. And he puts his arm around me and he says, "I just want you to know that if you hadn't gotten sober, I wouldn't be here." And that was a moment, right? So to just give some background about our relationship, he's a mama's boy, always has been. I mean, I put him into preschool after I had a brain tumor because I thought, what happens if something happens to me? And I mean, he was connected to me. I was like, he's got to go meet people. And, because it was just he and I. His sister was at school while he was little, and we were very, very, very connected and are very much alike. So when he was struggling when we both were struggling, we played into each other tremendously. One of the things you'll find if you have a child that's an addict, they know how to push all my fear buttons, right? So anytime he needed me to give him whatever he wanted, he would just tell me he was going to commit suicide. And I would basically fix everything for him, right? Because I was so fearful that he was going to commit suicide. And so when I got sober and we stopped playing that sort of dance, it was hard. We've never been that explosive, the two of us. And I tried not to be explosive because that's not helpful, right? But since he's been sober, so he got sober in September 2020. It's complicated if I'm honest. We're very connected and yet we have a lot of sort of baggage between the two of us.
That's going to be around forever.
Yeah, forever. And we have to choose every day to deal with that in a productive way, because if we don't, it can get pretty toxic in a hurry. And so both of us are committed. We try very hard now to communicate in a way that works for both. It's the new dance that I spoke about, right? And that we're not waltzing or tangoing. We're trying to respect each other and communicate in a way, but we each uh separately have moments that we have to be honest with each other about. And it's specifically him. He grew up in a very traumatic environment that I'm pretty responsible for. I mean, his dad participated in it, right? He danced with all of us. And my husband, bless his heart, is the hugest enabler of all time. If he were sitting here, he would say, "Yes, I am." And so there's some responsibility to share in that, but I was the one that was creating that, right? And so I've in part of my recovery is constantly being willing to hear that from him. Constantly, like if he called right now and said, "Look, I need to have a hard conversation with you about some way I'm feeling," I would be like, "Hit me. Like, let's talk about it," because that's part of building the new trust and rapport, is being open and understanding the impact that I had on his life, and not necessarily in a good way for a lot of years.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, obviously, you don't want the situation to be so, but in a way, the fact that you're in recovery and he's in recovery gives you both a completely different understanding of each
Yeah,
other. And in a
yeah.
way, even if your daughter and your husband or people in the purview are part of the process, they don't really know what it's like to be an addict. So you can actually talk the talk and walk the walk with him and vice versa, right? And that's amazing.
Well, and we get to talk about his recovery hasn't necessarily looked like mine. We've done it differently, right? But there's constant conversations about, like, when he feels triggered or when he's dealing with something emotionally hard, and how he's reacting. And he and I have that ability to relate to one another. And so if you think that's like speaking Chinese, he and I both speak Chinese,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Whereas my daughter and my husband don't necessarily speak that language. And so there are more blessings. This sounds very, very weird, but I have so much gratitude for being an addict. I have so much gratitude for what my life looks like today because I've had to do this work or because of addiction has played this role in my life. When I used to work at the recovery center, there was a client in my office one day and she said, "Okay, you have to choose one of these options that I'm about ready to give you." And I was like, "Great." And she's like, "You can have the best childhood, right? Your dad's not an alcoholic, your mom protected you, your siblings liked you, like it was beautiful. Or you can have your life today." It wasn't lost on me, right? Because I have to have some gratitude for the things that have happened in the past in order to have gratitude for today, because I am only here today with the life that I have today because all of those other things I experienced, including the sexual abuse, right? I experienced all of those things and that's helped me be the person that I am today. And because of that has helped my son be the person he is and my daughter and my husband and the relationships and the people that I've been able to help. And so I have a tremendous amount of gratitude about being an addict.
Yeah, I think it's weird to say it. I think you even
Yeah.
said it, like it's weird
Yeah.
to say that, but I completely agree. I think having going through hard things in life teach you to appreciate it more and teach you to look at things in a way that you never imagined you would before. You mentioned before that one of the things that helped you when going to treatment was that you had the ability to talk about your sexual abuse with other people that were willing to listen
Yeah.
outside of just your husband.
Yeah.
My wife and I went a we lost our daughter at 31 weeks pregnancy about 7 months ago. And we embarked in a completely different life that we never thought we would be in. Uh, But the challenges that we're going through and the groups and the people that we met and the love that we're receiving from people that are part of this new version of ours is something that I obviously wish I didn't have to go through it to learn, but certainly will have a lasting impact until the
Yeah.
day I go to my grave,
Yeah.
right? And that's the muscle that you can't really learn on a Netflix special. You have to, like these things that we go through in life, you with your addiction issue and sexual abuse and what I'm going through now with my wife and everything, that muscle gets worked and it gives you one, an appreciation for life that you didn't think you would have before. So literally everything from, how I spend my time at work, how I have conversations with people like you, or how I spend time with my family and her family, everything has changed.
Yeah.
Right. And had I not gone through that, I probably would be dealing with life differently. And as you know, like small movements that you make in life now are going to have lasting effects. So the little things that I'm doing now and that you're doing are going to have, it's kind of like steering a plane. 1 degree to this side, you end up in China instead of
Yeah.
Brazil, right?
Well, and you're speaking right now, and it's not about addiction, right? This is just about life. You're speaking exactly why it's so important for family members to let their addict muddle through life and figure it out. Because if somebody were to come in to any of our lives and just fix it for us, right? And make it not quite so painful, then we don't have the same appreciation. We don't have the same gratitude. We don't remember what it was like to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps because we didn't have to. Our moms did it for us, right? And so those memories, those experiences do not that's what I'm talking about when I say, as a parent, are we contributing to the solution or are we contributing to the problem? And I'm talking like long-term wellness. And if we're and your story is just as applicable as one that's struggling with addiction. It's like there's so much gratitude that can come from the hardest things I've ever experienced in my life. And it can transform who I am in the best way. But if I don't go through it, then I don't have that experience. And oftentimes families will eliminate that experience from a loved one's life because they are so uncomfortable watching them go through it.
I agree. I'm originally from Brazil and my family lives in Portugal now. I have a nephew who was born in the US and lived in Brazil, lived in Portugal, and he just came back to the States, enlisted in the National Guard here in Colorado. And he's been here about 5 months and about 4 months. And he's just kind of like, he's 19. He's just like struggling through life. Like, how do I rent a place? How do I get a driver's license? We're going to go skiing in Breckenridge in December. And like, he can't afford it. So he's not going to go. And we sometimes have this conversation where like, I'm like, he's got to go through it. He's got
Yes.
to hustle. He's got to figure out his priorities. Right. And maybe my wife will say something like, well, we can help him or something. But I know, and and she knows too, that it's the challenges that you go through in life that are going to make you a better person. And I want him to go through that
Yeah.
so he doesn't end up, you know, taking things for granted
Well,
and appreciates.
and skiing at Breckenridge is a perfect example, right? So if you look at this in terms of like addiction or anything else, it's like, I'll just pay. I want him to go have a good time.
Right.
I'll just pay for it. And what we're eliminating is can you imagine how proud of himself he is going to be when he goes and works and gets enough money for next year to be skiing with you in Breckenridge, right? And
That's
if
the
I
discipline.
and if I pay, I'm eliminating all of that self efficacy, if you will, on his part, all of that ability to be proud of himself, all of the ability for him to know that he can do it by just paying for it because it's like, oh, well, he's just going to go have a good time, right? And we do that so often, and not just in addiction, just in life. It's like we have to let people learn how to create the life that they want for themselves because it is what they are going to be so confident and so proud of themselves when they're able to do it.
Agree 100%. So you go through treatment, you're there for 28 days, you get out, you get hired back by the company because you wanted to kind of give back. I assume there was a sense of how do I help other people?
Yes.
And you're working there for 6 years. At what point do you say, maybe there's something more that I can do? Like, maybe there's like a different aspect of it. Was it because you thought there were things that were missing from treatment that you thought you could deliver on a one-on-one basis as a coach? What was the reason you started
Yeah,
Rise?
that's a great question. So, my former boss, I'm going to plug his book here if you don't mind. He wrote a book
Yeah,
called
please.
Unhooked. And it is a book on how do we help families, right? How do we help your addicted loved one? And as a family, how do I heal? So I started working with families a lot from the perspective of this book, Unhooked. When I started to work with families, I just started to realize, I have a pretty strong sense since getting sober about an idea of what my higher power is, right? And believe that everybody gets to decide what that is for themselves. But I started to feel this pull that it was like, Jennifer, I've walked you through all of these different areas of your life so that you can do this one thing, right? Like all of these situations have led us to this one shared goal of being able to help families. And it became a pull that I could no longer ignore. I was fairly successful at doing what I was doing and loved the people that I worked with and feel very strongly and support the company, but I just couldn't ignore it. And so that was when I started, starting to go get my certifications and some of the other things that I needed to feel like I was, could go do this. And it's been hard. I'm not going to, starting your own business is challenging, but that underlying you're doing the right thing, right? You're in line with your purpose has just always kept me plugging away. And there's nothing more rewarding than seeing a mom or a dad or a sibling or a spouse in the midst of the chaos. So even if their loved one has not been able to get sober yet, is still struggling with substance, in the midst of all of that, to be able to find their peace, right? It's in the eye of the storm, if you will. If there's a mom listening to me right now, she's like, that's impossible. Like, there's no way I could possibly find peace if my child doesn't get sober. I'm here to tell you that you can, right? You can. And not only can you find your peace, whether your loved one ever gets sober or not, you can actually contribute to the solution in helping them find a path to recovery, right? The greater influences in our life are family. And so if my mom is getting healthy or my wife is getting healthy, that's a great influence to me as somebody that is continuing to struggle, right? And when you're on this path as a loved one and getting healthy yourself, the trust and rapport that is starting to be built with your addict. Because look, by the time you reach me, almost all trust and rapport has been crushed, right? There's no trust going on in relationships. But the goal is how do I take care of my side of the street, if you will, right? I get healthy myself. And I've seen it so many times, like the impact that it has on your addicted loved one to find a path of recovery is absolutely beautiful.
Got it. So when they come to you, they are you're working primarily with the families that are supporting
Yep.
somebody in recovery, right? So if
Yep.
my wife is in recovery, you're working directly with me
Yes.
to create the foundation and the support system
Yep.
support to support her.
Yep. So
Got it.
this one of the things that the reason why I also chose this path is I will never forget this as long as I live. I had been sober for I think about I can't remember 3 to 6 months, pretty early in my sobriety. And I'm driving in a car with my husband and I'm telling him like I couldn't have been more excited. I was like I'm meeting these people and I'm talking about my stuff and I'm feeling peace for the first time and I'm just we call it in recovery like the pink cloud, right? Like I am just so excited about life. And I look over at him and he is deadpan. And he says, I'm really happy that you're finding your people. But what am I supposed to do? I've been doing this for 14 years too. And I remember just kind of looking at him and being like, I didn't know what to say because he wasn't wrong. Right. Like being a
You
loved
thought he
one.
would be just riding along and
Yeah.
chipper that you're
Yeah.
making it.
Yeah, and the truth is, like, being a loved one of an addict is as isolating as being an addict yourself. It is as full of shame as it is being an addict yourself, right? Like all of those things are true for loved ones or the addict, and it's such an underserved population. Like, still to this day, part of the reason I do this is to, like, a living amends to my husband, right? To try to fill some of those gaps for services that he needed but didn't. He said I even did like Google searches and tried to find people and didn't know where to turn. And so this is also like trying to fill in those gaps because if if we're going to learn new dance floors and new dances, we got to do it together. And from an addict's perspective, if I get sober and everything else is still the same, the thought processes are still the same, the words are still the same, everything is still the same, there's a good chance that I'm going to go back to the only coping mechanism that I ever knew in order to deal with the familiarity, if you will, of this old dance floor. And so, like, my husband is a beautiful example of I needed to be getting help and he needed to be getting help parallel. It's a miracle that we stayed married, right? We're able to muddle through this on our own, but it doesn't have to be that way.
There's some contrast with what we're going through too, which is my wife got a lot of support because obviously
Yes.
she was the one carrying the baby and she was the one who actually went through the physical loss.
Yes.
But this is like a known thing in like the loss community with children is that dads don't get any support because there's a societal understanding that men are stronger. They're just going to muscle through and try to find a fix. And I didn't have anybody reach out to me and say, how are you doing? With the exception of a few people, like maybe like very close family. Most everybody was like, how's Macy doing?
Yeah.
Nobody
Yeah.
asked, if I was okay. And I think that's actually very powerful because had I not been in a good state of mind to support her, and I did seek help with therapy and things like that to make sure that I dealt with it and I didn't just stuff it down, which is what
Yeah.
men do.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would have been able to support her to the extent that I have. And I imagine with what you just mentioned with your husband and maybe even your daughter is the same thing, right? That, hey, this is what they're going through, that you're the person getting treatment, getting help is important, but also everybody else that's adjacent to them.
And it's this is the thing, right? I could go on all year about the stigma of addiction and as a society, what we think about addiction and the shame attached to it and a lot of things, right? But this is the thing, like we have to heal out loud in the sense that We have to stop putting shame just on the addict and rather look at it as like, okay, we're going to heal from this thing. We're going to heal out loud. We're going to heal. Like my husband says to me, do you have to tell everybody you're an addict? Because every conversation I get in socially, somehow it turns out that I'm like an addict, right? Well, most people are like, what do you do for work? And I tell him, I said, the difference for me is that there's zero shame attached to it anymore, right? Like, most people don't want to identify as an addict, and I respect that because there's still this like underlying shame attached to it, and I don't feel that. But this is the thing, like if I'm going to thrive as an addict in recovery, I've got to have my people around me learning how to heal from this too. And same for you, right? It's a miracle marriages last to begin with, but specifically marriages that go through something like you're walking through or that I've walked through.
Traumatic, yeah.
I mean, it's a miracle, but that's the thing. There are these services out there to help people navigate this. And one of the things I'm trying to do is just get the word out because like I said, my husband looked for somebody doing something similar to what I'm doing and just couldn't find it. People we need to stop suffering, right? The addict needs to stop suffering, the family needs to stop suffering. We need to heal, we need to find joy. And it's all possible.
Jennifer, I have two more questions for you, and I'll let you go. I think I know the answer to the first one. I like to ask people what they would do if they weren't doing what they're doing. So, like to give an example, 25 years ago, if I was choosing what I wanted to do, I've always wanted to be like a commercial airline pilot, which has
Mm,
nothing to do with what I do now and
yeah.
never will. What would you be doing if? And I think the reason I said I think I know the answer is because you're so passionate about it and it's kind of like your life calling. Would you be doing something else if you weren't doing what you're doing today?
So, funny story. When I was 23, before I ever took an opiate in my life, I actually went to school to be a drug and alcohol counselor. I was pregnant with my son, right? So long ago. In Boise, where I live, there's a place called Micron, and they build computer chips. And I, for a period of time while I was going to school, was in the fab building computer chips. And my husband also worked there for 25 years. And every day I would cry that I'm like, I'm not changing the world. I'm not helping anybody. I'm not doing anything of value. Right. So I think, again, going back to my higher power, like I always knew that was my direction. I just needed a little bit of like experience in the real world of this deal. Right. I needed some credibility to sitting next to an addict and being able to walk them through this. But always, originally, I went to college to be a music teacher. The arts are super important to me. But always, how can I be part of humanity? How can I serve mankind and somehow be a benefit, if you will, and add to the world?
Which is at the end of the day what actually matters because nobody's going to remember Jennifer as a highly successful executive or be as a CEO. Look, they're going to think about how kind you were, if you help people, that you
How
look
I
people
made
in
him
the eye, that
feel
you
when
had.
I walked away.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what actually matters.
yeah.
The last question I have for you is what are some books or podcasts or resources you would recommend to people that are, I think you already mentioned the
Yeah.
book,
So
but what are some other books that you would recommend to folks listening to this?
I've got a room. So Unhooked is one of them
Hmm.
by Jason Coombs, Coombs. The second one is, I don't have it sitting right here, Codependency and Shame. This is really, really important. So, I, as an addict, act out of shame, but also if you struggle with codependency, it is most often rooted in shame, right? It's the idea that I'm trying to be an ideal version of me. Like that's where my worth is, right? Like if I can be the perfect version of me, then I will be liked, loved, seen. And it's the farther I get away from the authentic version of me to become the ideal version of me, that's where shame lies. And in order to understand my addict, I also need to know that because I've never met an addict that didn't say I felt like a square peg in a round hole.
Hmm.
And what they're trying to say is I felt like I didn't belong. I felt different. I felt like in order to be liked, loved, and seen, I had to be a different version of me. So that's really important. The other, which is kind of a hot book right now, which is But Let Them. by Mel Robbins has a lot of good information about codependency. So if you've read the book, you know that that's only half of it. It's the let them, let me theory. And the let me theory is the part that I am super invested in when it comes to helping families. So those would be three right off the top of my head. But there is also Codependency No More that I think can be very helpful. And there's a workbook for Codependency No More that I think can be really helpful. One of the services that I provide is we do coaching calls where for periods of time we choose a book and we go through it and I help sort of bring it back to how it applies to addiction and how it will help with your loved ones. And I help people all over the country. I'm even about ready to help somebody in Canada. So there are no bounds to the people that can participate in this. And I do 2 of those a week. And then I also do individual sessions with people. And again, can do that with people all over the country. So books are an important part of this. And I think that, I just need to keep reading and keep learning.
Yeah.
But I think, especially Unhooked, if you're struggling with somebody right now in the moment that is struggling with an addiction, go get unhooked. And I think it can be the stepping stones to finding a way out.
Awesome. And where can people find you if they are wanting to work with you?
Yeah. So my website is www.riseaddiction LC, just one L, LC.com. And there on my website, you can say connect us or whatever, and it will send me an email. I'd love to chat. Even if it's like I don't necessarily want to have you at services, but I just want to talk more about you with you. Contact me. I'd love to connect. I'm also on TikTok at Jen Chase, JenChase, and am on both Instagram and Facebook under Rise Addiction Life Coaching.
Amazing. Do you have a podcast yet?
I don't, but
You got to have one because
I
you're a
think
great
I'm gonna
guest.
do it. I think I'm gonna do it.
You should do it. It's not that hard. If I can do it, you should be able to do it
It's
too.
interesting. I talked to somebody earlier. I'm really starting to kind of figure out how to make it work. So
Yeah. No, I think you should do it. You're a great guest, and I appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm sure everybody that listens to this interview is going to enjoy it.
thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.